All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope you are feeling suitably refreshed after our lunch break. So it is my great pleasure this afternoon to inaugurate our second session, which deals, of course, with the legacies of the Habsburg Empire. And we've already started to address this question in the previous panel, but in this afternoon session, we will deepen that analysis. And so first up for our second keynote is Professor Jan Zielonka, who is currently Professor of European Politics at the University of Oxford, and Ralph Dahrendorf Professorial Fellow at St. Antony's College, Oxford. He graduated from the University of Warsaw, earning his PhD, thesis titled The Political Doctrine of the British Labour Party, and subsequently has served in a number of very prestigious organizations as a professor and lecturer, including at the European University Institute in Florence, the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, University of Groningen, also in the Netherlands, University of Warsaw. And he has taught and written widely on subjects that will be of great interest to us today. He's a member of the editorial board of Acta Politica, Journal of European Integration, the International Spectator and Perspectives Review of International Affairs. Most notably, he has recently coordinated a number of very large research projects, including one from 2009 to 2013, Media and Politics in Central and Eastern Europe, Qualities of Media, Qualities of Democracy, sponsored by the European Research Council with a $3 million budget. So I know we are all looking forward very much to hearing what Professor Zielonka has to say. I assume a very thought-provoking and perhaps provocative discussion, and then we will proceed to our second panel. So a warm welcome to Jan Zielonka.
Many thanks. I'm delighted to be here. I'm grateful to Emil and Tom for bringing me. I came here and I immediately lost the voice. But a colleague of mine said, "You are in the city of opera singers. Go to the pharmacy, they give you something." And you see, I can speak, at least for the first few minutes. Well, I cannot shout, but is it better? Better? No? Like this? I think this works. This I'm not sure. Yeah? Look, I come from underdeveloped countries, so please bear with me. I also noticed that this afternoon session, we are no longer talking about monarchy, but empire. I guess this is because the organizer knew that I'm Republican. Although I have to confess, I only once agreed to write an official speech, and it was for the Queen, not the British one, no, my own one, which is a Dutch one. You see, my field is the EU. It is not the Habsburg Empire. And speaking in Vienna with such a distinguished audience about Habsburg Empire is like teaching Italians to cook pasta in Rome or Napoli. I feel rather embarrassed. But my work on the EU was always profoundly influenced by the Habsburg Empire, and I can share with you some lessons I drawn from it. To use the previous analogy, I can proclaim to be a great fan of Italian pasta without pretending to be the best cook in this room, yeah? Most recent work on the legacy of Habsburg Empire focused on 1918. This is partly because of the anniversary, of course, and partly because the dissolutions of the Habsburg Empire has some lessons for contemporary Europe and the EU as such. As you know, I myself contributed to some books and articles talking about this integration. Yet the Habsburg Empire existed for a few hundred years, and some would even argue for 1,000 years. And it's rather unfair to talk only about its dissolution, however important. Some scholars, like Peter Klaus Hartmann especially, they showed that the EU is using similar institutional solutions to those applied by the Habsburg Empire. For instance, the way empire handled debts in its constitutive parts through moratoria, restructuring, and bailouts is similar to what the famous, or some would say infamous, Troika of the European Commission's European Central Bank and the IMF was doing after 2008 financial crisis. Apparently, there were no less than 57 bailouts in the 18th century alone in the Habsburg Empire. So the three Greek bailouts seem rather modest in comparison, although we can immediately add that maybe they would require many more bailouts to catch up. And I already see my Austrian taxpayers jumping to the floor, having a comment on this. The decision-making system adopted by the EU also resembles the empire. The mixed and some would say messy system of unanimous decision in some fields and majoritarian or qualified majority in others was practiced in Habsburg Empire with some success. And also legal arrangements in empire went always hand in hand with informal decision-making. And let's not forget, empire consisted of 300 different units. And there was no other way of making progress in a peaceful rather than bellicose way than exactly through this rather messy and very often informal arrangements. EU, after all, has only 28 units, soon 27, and they are all states. Of course, these are states of different nature and strength. I always say that they are like those birds, yeah? Some are eagles and some are chickens which cannot even fly. Is Cyprus a sovereign state at present? Well, is there somebody from Cyprus? If there is, you know what I mean. All of this is interesting, but I find this very explicit comparisons rather risky, because the historical context is different, and so is the nature of the beast. And I tried once to be more explicit about comparisons, and I totally failed, even though I'm not a historian. Political scientists can be shallow, as you know. But does this mean that there is no really match for students of international relations or European integrations to look at the Habsburg Empire as an example? No. There are a lot of reasons I will try to argue, but we need to do it in a different, more nuanced and implicit rather than explicit way. The study of the Habsburg Empire tells us that the international actors are not simply clones of a prototype nation-state, as assumed by the international relations paradigm of international anarchy. This was already said before. I think Stephen started this argument. Some states are simply more sovereign than others, to put it simply, although lawyers would always disagree, because for lawyers you are either sovereign or not. The study of Habsburg Empire also teaches us how to accommodate this diversity in a creative and yet workable manner. It also tells us much about uses and misuses of power. In short, I believe that those of you who look at the Habsburg Empire, you can be less old-fashioned and in fact more innovative about international relations today. I think you will be more qualified to revise the long-standing paradigms, and I think you will be better prepared to find solutions to cope with the complex interdependence and complexity of the modern world. The EU is not an offspring of the Habsburg Empire, nor is the United States, China, or Russia. However, they all have similar imperial characteristics. These are not typical nation-states in any way. They all look, talk, and walk like empires. Well, you know the rest. And most seriously, and here I give you definitions of empire which I use in my work, is that the EU, US, Russia, and China represent vast territorial units with global military, economic, and diplomatic influence. They have a record of acting in a way that imposes significant domestic constraints on formally sovereign actors, and they all have imperial visions of themselves and see other, especially neighbors, as a kind of periphery to be governed by the imperial center. But tell me, does it make really difference whether Russia, China, or US are seen as empires and not states? In my view, and this is very academic what I want to say, but political discussions I leave to the panel later, because there are some terrific persons on this panel, and I will concentrate here on something students need for their future work. It makes a big difference whether your dependent variable are states or empire. You know what is dependent variable. It's the object you study, the object you try to explain. Why it makes such a difference? Because studies of states tend to focus on interstate conflict, diplomatic negotiations, political leadership, and national interest. The study of empire demands a focus on the scope and structure of governance, the nature of borders, center-periphery relations, and respective civilizing missions. These are totally different topics, and they actually require different theories and methods too, to understand. Studies of states take power seriously, but are less interested in the nature of international actors. Studies of empire, on the other hand, show that interdependence between periphery and center often works to the former advantage, and regardless of all asymmetries. Peripheries are very often able to draw center into their parochial conflicts. Besides, the empire often tries to civilize and institutionalize their peripheries rather simply attempt to conquer or exploit them, as is sometimes assumed by scholars of hegemony. And this is exactly why Habsburg Empire is so important comparing to other historical empires, because they were very good at that. So they show that you can do international relations differently. Studies of states differentiate between domestic and foreign affairs. You know, when I was a young scholar, I used to work with David Singer. David Singer is a guru of international relations. He's called as the father of international relations as discipline. And why he is called as the father of discipline? Because it's his seminal article in the 60s. He wrote that you should distinguish between domestic and foreign. These are different level of analysis, And you shouldn't mix them up, as comparative government people very often do, because they are simply two different animals. Well, I like David a lot, drank a lot of vodka with him, but I always told him this was the biggest mistake we made in the study of international relations. And when you study empires, you understand why. Because, for us who study empire, this distinction is very questionable, very often misleading. Empires hardly ever possessed fixed and hard borders, and they often find it impractical to differentiate between external and internal policy. Studies of states underline the role of order, hierarchy, and structure in international politics. Studies of empire may help us to comprehend not only the evolving multipolar structure, but also the nature of magnetic poles, which within the current global system. Studies of states and the emphasis of territoriality and sovereignty have difficulty in explaining the cascading economic interdependence, transnational jurisdictions, and multiply cultural loyalties. They just assume that they are given, but they are never given. And if you study Habsburg Empire, and we had a very interesting discussion about identities in the previous session, you understand why. Studies of empire with their capacity to account for these fuzzy borders, informal hierarchies, and center-periphery dependencies may find it easier to understand the features of this contemporary world, especially after the digital revolution. In sum, there are good reasons to believe that the study of the Habsburg Empire, or any other for that matter, reveals many new and neglected aspects of the evolving international system, which makes the exercise very worthwhile, not just for scholars, but also practitioners. And I'm looking at Robert Cooper, who is the best example of how practitioners can understand interstate politics with the imperial twist, so to speak. And let me finish with the main task which I was giving. What about the EU? Does it resemble a state or empire? So let's go through basic checklists, yeah? Let's have a short checklist. Does the EU possess hard and fixed external border lines like states? Or does it have soft border zones in flux, as most empires, including Habsburg one? Eh? Is this distinction between member, associate member, or sharp or fuzzy? Those who study Ukraine, you are asked to take on board how many EU regulations and laws? Well, where the border would be fixed, it's not your business. And not the business of the EU to tell you what you should do. It's not only in Ukraine. You can look at North Africa. It's exactly the same. I think in the official neighborhood policy there are 54 countries where there is the same pattern of exporting governance abroad. Is the EU, another box to click, is the EU culturally and economically homogeneous unit like most states, or a more multicultural entity with notable socio-economic discrepancies like the Habsburg Empire? Well, here the question is rather easy, right? Although, the EU has this system that they send somebody from Latvia to Greece and the other way around. I don't know. This is probably to pay tribute to incompetence. Has the EU a clear hierarchical governance structure like states? Or has it a pluralistic government structure in which authoritative allocations, functional competences, and territorial constituencies diverge. Which one? The answer is rather simple. Does the EU possess a single army and police force, like states? Or do we have a multiplicity of various overlapping military and policy institutions in the EU? Perhaps you will conclude that the EU is a hybrid creature. As Italians said, né carne né pesce. But it certainly does not have characteristics of a Westphalian state. We're constantly being taught, the progress of European integration resembles state-building process. We had common market, and we have common currency, external borders, common foreign policy, and we end up in citizenship in a nation-state. Well, our checklist indicated something opposite. And besides, isn't hybridity an imperial feature? Was not the Habsburg Empire a perfect prototype of a hybrid feature? Although I don't know that the emperor was using this term. You may find it all abstract, but I'm a political scientist and not a historian. Political scientists design models representing a conceptually possible expressions of political authority, organized at the national or transnational level. Historians, as you well know, because most of you are historians, you deal with the world as it is. You would ask, who is the emperor in the EU? Certainly not Mr. Juncker. How many soldiers has the European Empire? Well, we once promised to have 60,000, yeah? But I haven't seen them yet. Bob, how many we have? 2 brigades? What is the EU civilizing mission? I don't have simple answer to these questions. But if the EU is not an empire, what is it? What is it? And why do Brits find it so difficult to leave the EU? Why does Ukraine still want to join it? No doubt the EU has lost much of its sex appeal. It may already be in the stage of disintegration, perhaps irreversible. But we should not forget that the Habsburg Empire existed several hundred years, even though it was often described as dysfunctional, if not mad. Read Jaroslav Hasek's book, The Good Soldier of Schweik. This is where I learned, as a kid, something useful about the Austrian Empire.